Thank you for joining us on ABC 10's In Focus. I'm Trent Bailey. I am happy to say I got Sara Cambensy in here with us. Sara, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You are the current state rep for the 109th District and you're going for re-election. First question for you, since you are just under a year now in office, what's the learning curve been like down in Lansing?
The learning curve is big, and it's tough coming in halfway through, I guess, when my colleagues come in.
Yeah.
But having that local government experience, 10 years as an appointed planning commissioner, a sitting charter commissioner, and then a sitting city commissioner really gives me a lot of the government experience that a lot of people come into state offices without. So it's been good.
Has there been anything that you started maybe in the last year down in Lansing that you are really hoping to get back to if you are reelected?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that not only myself, have been focused on, but other representatives is the dark store legislation, and we saw one of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who's not going to get reelected and be with us next year, who really was pivotal in bringing that legislation forward, has a tax background, so really understands the issue, and had members from both sides in the House that supported that.
Mm-hmm.
So without him there, it does feel like we have to start over, but hopefully we can pick up the ball and run with it.
And that's something that gained a decent amount of traction over the last couple of years, and that's taking away a lot of tax revenue for local governments and such.
Absolutely.
And so is there a bill that's already written in place, or is it something that has to be reintroduced, or what's the next step going forward with this?
Yeah, the Senate chose not to take up the previous bill that my predecessor, the late John Keevala, had brought forward with Representative Maturin. So it looks like we will have to start over. We can take the same bill and try and run it beginning in January, and we will probably do that. But we'll also have a new governor, and that might give us a chance to work with him or her to kind of see if we can't resolve this without legislation.
Speaking of legislation and fixing these statewide issues, recently you spoke out about the two ballot initiatives that were kind of passed through the legislature to take them off of the ballot. And the one was about paid sick leave, and the other one was minimum wage increases across the state. And you were very against these being passed in the legislature. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, I think, as elected officials, it's our responsibility to work with each other, come up with places where we can find common ground and, go from there, whether it's minimum wage, paid sick leave, anything that really affects the residents of the state of Michigan. And what you saw is legislators weren't willing to keep working on those issues to come up with common ground. And citizens throughout the state came up with an initiative. They got the signatures. It was set to be on our ballot, and through the veto power that we have as legislators, we can actually pull it off. The governor is not allowed to vote on it and have the final say. So, knowing that they had the votes to do that, I felt like it should only be used, I guess that power that our Constitution grants us as sitting elected officials should only be used in extreme measures. And this was one where I think going back, we just didn't sit down and work with each other enough to come up with a solution before it got to this point.
And that's something that, it takes thousands upon thousands of signatures and really people hitting the pavement to go get these things on the ballot. And so basically it just got taken off the ballot, or was there something put in place instead of that?
No, it got taken off. And so, we voted to pass it, but knowing that, the real goal was to actually take this and, chip away at it and change it. And I guess, when I look at the power of the people and, their ability to petition their government, I think that any time that we fail as elected officials to reach consensus, to come up with legislation that works for the majority, you find this happening. And, to me, it just signals that we need to do our job better down in Lansing.
Yeah, and kind of bouncing off of that, a big issue has always been, for the last few years at least, if not more, is the Line 5.
Yep.
And I know you, as well as Scott Dianda and even Ed McBroom, everyone seems to be kind of on board with this tunnel idea. What's your reaction now that you've had a little time to process this? Yeah,
and what I start to tell people is no one that I've met, whether in government or just a citizen in a community I represent, no one wants to see an oil spill in the Straits of Mackinac. And so, really the challenge that we face is finding a solution to, the last 70 years of pipelines that are built throughout our country that give us that supply of crude oil, diesel, propane, everything that we use every day, either directly in our homes or to bring us those goods and services, flows through that line. And so to simply say, we need to shut it down without a solution, doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. And so,
especially us that are this far away from Lansing,
absolutely.
too. So,
yeah, and so, what does that mean going forward? And it really is finding a solution that, protects our Great Lakes first and foremost, but allows us to still use that crude oil without rebuilding the pipeline going over towards Ironwood and then all the way, down through Lower Peninsula. So it really is, to me, one of the best solutions, finding that tunnel option, having Enbridge step up and pay for it, and then being able to put the other utilities in there that will strengthen our electrical grid and give us more options to lower our electrical prices. So I think it's a win-win. And I know some environmental groups are still, slightly opposed to it, but I'm hoping that within time and, to show them exactly what this tunnel can do to protect our water, I'm hoping that they'll come along and see the good.
But, I mean, we're still 7 to 10 years away from it being completed, right?
Yep.
And did the Michigan or the Mackinac Bridge Authority approve this already? Are they?
So the details, where we are now is knowing that, is it even feasible to do a tunnel? And, would Enbridge step up and pay for that? And those answers now, since the beginning of October, are yes. So from there, now it's going to be going through and negotiating who has authority over it. Once it's built, what do we do in the meantime to protect our straits and to make sure that we don't have any ruptures with Line 5.
Right.
There's a lot of things you're going to see come forward now that until we make that decision that yes, we're absolutely going in this direction, we need to do X, Y, and Z.
I know one of your major points of what you wanted to focus on, especially I'm sure now and back when you first ran in the special election, was energy, but you're also on the Natural Resources Committee.
Yes.
And this is an area that kind of touches on both of these things. And we've seen big oil spills in Michigan before, like down in Kalamazoo. That was like one of the biggest oil spills that was inland in the United States at the time. And so now we have a much bigger, more vulnerable spot here, and we need to protect it. And I think this is a good compromise. But how far away do you think we are from ironing out all the details and really getting this starting to go?
Your guess is probably as good as mine at this point, but it's going to take several months to still move this along and make sure that we have everything in place before it's a done deal. I would say the one thing that I've learned from looking at all the studies, talking to experts, talking to our state officials is that there's much more likely a chance of an oil spill to happen crossing our small streams and rivers than there are right now in the straits. And I think what that tells me is, we've been focused on this one area, but what we should be focused on just as much is, the pipeline that actually goes through our entire, Upper Peninsula and all of our counties. And, I think you're going to see other things come along with it that strengthen those protections from the legislature in Lansing.
And energy is always, the energy prices in the Upper Peninsula are very high, and it seems like they're always rising, or there's something
Yep.
going on that's causing prices to spike
Yep.
here and there. Are you working with anyone about anything or on any legislation that is going to help this in the area and across the state as a whole? Or what do you really see your role in the energy field right now as a legislature?
Yeah, I think, when I came in, I couldn't pick my committees, so I was kind of handed the committees that no one wanted and that were kind of left over. But I do think with Representative Dianda being term limited, that is one committee I would like to step up and be on, simply because, we've been trying to resolve these problems in the UP since, the 1980s and earlier than that even. With the tunnel option, one of the problems we have in the UP is reliability. And yes, we have lines coming in from Wisconsin, but to strengthen the line coming from lower Michigan is a huge opportunity for us. What that'll do is help open up, future talks about generation. We know in the eastern UP we don't have enough. Some of the highest prices in my district in Germfask are suffering, terribly because no one is stepping up over there and really making any new investments. And so with a third of the land mass in the state, in the UP, we have only 3% of the population. So, our costs are higher. We're not making the new investments in technology. And I really think that this, if the tunnel is the best way to go forward with Line 5, we can run that line up and we can have that reliability and hopefully, future new generation to help lower the cost.
Right, and that's another big selling point that they had with the tunnel, is that broadband and electrical can also go through there.
Yep.
Do you think that there should be a better plan in place to roll out these sort of things once the tunnel gets done? Or do you think that's something that kind of happen as the construction begins?
I know right now, Enbridge is negotiating and talking to other utility companies. Some utilities make sense to run in there. Some might make sense to run, alongside or, something like that, or just over the top. But I know that, right now with Enbridge saying, we're committed to paying for the tunnel, it'll fit our pipeline and some other utilities. But if there are more going forward, what does that mean? Who else might step up and pay for it, and who benefits? And ultimately, everyone in the UP is going to benefit from increased utilities.
Right. So another committee that you're on is the local government committee.
Right.
Do you think that the local government should be doing more of a role in the energy field here? Like Marquette, for instance, has its own Board of Light and Power, and it's running its own grid, essentially. Do you think that local governments should be doing this better instead of relying on these statewide issues?
I think it's turned out to be a little bit of a growing pain for those of us on the Marquette Board of Light and Power, in terms of having low rates for so long and then making a big investment in a new energy center, seeing those rates go up. But, certainly the benefits now of, not having to worry about the outside grid so much, not having to worry about a for-profit company, what they might be doing, not be doing, and our rate increases. I think, we've done okay in Marquette. And, Escanaba years ago, I know they actually sold their plant and started buying off the market with prices that are similar to ours in Marquette, but no local control. And, I think if you talk to a lot of residents in the UP, they like that local control.
Yeah.
And they like to own something and be a part of it. And we have 18 different electric utility franchises in the UP, which makes it tough. A lot of small territories,
Right.
a lot of big territories with no people.
Yeah.
And I think because of how we're regulated and set up, you're going to see hopefully some more compromise between the groups to work together, maybe even consolidate, just to keep that ownership here rather than having a big company come in from outside and take over.
Right. I'm going to switch this up a little bit and go to jobs. I know this area the UP especially is an area that has a lot of loss when it comes to income and wages in the last few years with the mine closing and the Ojibwe Correctional Facility closing now. What can you, well, what will you be doing if reelected to help bring jobs back here or help turn the market around in terms of jobs and the income in the area?
Yeah, I think, certainly mining is still a part of our future. I know a lot of people talk about it like it's a thing of the past, something we used to do. But there are a lot of explorations going on, and I look forward to working with companies and making sure that it's done right, that they respect the environmental laws we have in place that are some of the most stringent in the world right now, as well as with our forestry and timber products. I've got 2 paper mills in my district. The one in Munising is doing great. The one in Manistee is up and running, doing better than ever. And so I'd like to see our roots, our traditional industries continue to thrive. Of course, bring the empire back online. But I also think there are things going on in every community and every county that I represent that people have no idea about. Aerospace technology and online engineering stuff, making petri dishes and the actual machines that do the testing right out of Manistee.
I've never heard of this in the area, but
and really when you look at how people are able to kind of choose where they live or locate a company, one of the biggest things we have to do is really focus on our airports and how easy is it for them to transport things, whether by rail, air, out of here that we make here. And one of the things I'd like to look at K.I. Sawyer is doing a customs facility out there so that people can actually ship direct. Companies in the UP grow their companies, bring new ones in from K.I. Sawyer. And I think if we make that investment at the legislative level, at the government level, I think we're going to see our counties and our businesses do all the work that sometimes we as elected officials try and do ourselves, which give incentives or tax breaks. I think if we actually put the infrastructure in place, I think it'll happen naturally.
That's an interesting thing. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
So that's essentially cutting out a middleman somewhere else is what this would be doing.
Yeah, and it saves time.
Yeah.
When I go around and talk to small businesses and they have to have a 10-day grace period from when they ship something to when someone gets it. That's a long time in today's world when you know that you can order something on Amazon and it's to your door in 2 days.
Yeah.
I think we can do better for our businesses, and I think that's a way to empower them, to have a little more control over competing in the national market and worldwide.
Right. And you brought up Empire Mine, and Cliffs just recently signed a deal with the United Steelworkers Union, and that's hopefully a step in the right direction to open up this mine again.
Absolutely.
But is there something that the state can be doing or you will be pushing for if reelected to help further that along for a long-term solution to keep that open?
Yeah, one difference I've noticed in Michigan versus Minnesota, because let's face it, those are the 2 places right now where Cliffs has mines, is we've really stepped away from being involved at the state level and making sure that we're complementing what they're doing with research and design, pelletization, and what can we do to offer incentives for them to really look at the ore bodies we have here, to develop products, to go to the steel mills downstate and around the Great Lakes region that they're already doing in Minnesota. And so refocusing on the relationship, I think, is key. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is just working with them, making sure that whatever permitting they need for expansion, all of that stuff, that we're at the table.
And are you talking, you said incentives, are you talking about like tax breaks, or is it regulations that can be relaxed? What is the actual incentive for them at this point? If Minnesota's already working with them, how would we get them to come back?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, and Senator Casperson took the lead on this, is really looking at a way to help them put money aside. Already they have to bond and they're held accountable for environmental cleanup and regulations that they need to operate under. But if we could, create a fund where, they actually put money aside, I think that would alleviate a lot of the issues they're having with the EPA and kind of that overreach at the national level to allow them, to operate without having to bond like a traditional copper mine, nickel mine, and everything like that. So I think, by doing some of this stuff at the state side, we can show that they are being responsible. We're not lessening any environmental regulations. But instead of dealing with Washington, D.C., they're dealing with the state of Michigan. And, we're one of 2 states right now that are allowed to issue permits for wetlands. That's a big deal for them. It doesn't mean that, we're sidestepping any environmental stuff. It just means that they work with our DEQ instead of the EPA.
And with that, outside of that, what are other, maybe, is there programs that the state should be funding, trying to like retrain people in the time being, or some sort of way to reintroduce more workers into the job market in this area, now that we have kind of these vacuums of places where there used to be all these jobs and now there's not anymore. What should the state be doing, and what should you be doing as a legislature to help with this? Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things we've talked about is We Energies. We know that power plant is set to shut down in April of 2019. And there's probably around 70 men and women out there who would love to stay in the UP, but they'd like to have a similar good job. If we can get the mine to reopen at Empire, I know that all, if not most, would take a job there with similar skills. But if not, some of these other high-tech industries that are niche industries throughout my communities are ones that I'd like to see that retraining offered to. And I know the state already has a package for them, similar to what they did with the Empire mine. But it's really communicating, making sure that each industry is talking to each other, and that the employees actually know what jobs are going to open up and what they can prepare for.
Has the package that the state dealt with the Empire mine? 'Cause I know Snyder was up here when the mine closed and was talking about doing this package to help them. How successful has that been so far? I don't know the numbers at all on this, but it doesn't seem like, if you just look at incomes for the area, it doesn't seem like it has been that successful.
Right, and we know, and I try and tell people this all the time, that, it's going to be very hard for a legislator or a governor to come in here and replace an industry that, when the Tilden and Empire were both running, had a combined annual salary and benefits package of $240 million a year, just for our region. I can only dream of bringing in a company that can be on the same playing field, but I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And so a lot of the men and women that got laid off at Cliffs, I know many have been called back. Some went to Minnesota, but some have just picked up odds and ends jobs, and that's tough. That's why I think anyone in my position who really understands the region has to be supporting our mining in a responsible way because of the economy and the good jobs it brings.
Is there something that the DEQ does that it's more relaxed, or what when you said earlier that they'll be dealing with our DEQ instead of the EPA? What's the difference there?
Same regulations. It's just that we oversee it at the state level versus the federal level. And I think anytime there are issues, one of the issues Cliffs has been dealing with is their selenium problem. And to be able to have our regional DEQ office 15 miles away from the mines, and to have trained professionals that are working side by side with Cliffs to resolve those issues, build a new filtration system to capture all the selenium, it happens much quicker. And I think what that does for business, time is money. And so for Cliffs, it's one advantage that we have over Minnesota in terms of operating here versus there, is that we're not held up by the delays and the long feedback period from the EPA at the national level. You know, we have people right here in our community that basically do the same work.
I'm going to switch gears again.
Okay.
On you. Education in Michigan has been on the decline for some time now, unfortunately, especially when you see the reports about like the third grade reading levels that are all pretty low comparatively to other states especially. What should the state be doing or not doing to help with this, to help bring these numbers back up, to help us thrive as a state altogether?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think what we've done with education in the state is, I think we've gotten carried away with all of the regulations we're putting on from Lansing. You know, I really do think local control with education is best. I mean, you know your communities, you know your kids, you know if you need to spend more on counselors, you know if you need to spend more on math teachers. And I really think that, you know, one of the things we can do, one, is quit transferring money from the K-12 school aid fund to our universities and colleges, and step up and make that responsibility promise to our universities and colleges out of our general fund. And because we've given so many tax breaks, corporate tax breaks in the last 20 years, we're up to about $1.6 billion a year just in the corporate tax breaks. This is why we're having to play those shell games with money, and unfortunately we're doing it with our K-12 budget.
Yeah, but no one wants to hear raise taxes, whether that be corporate or otherwise.
Right.
And especially when it comes to what we're just talking about, bringing jobs back and bringing industries here.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody that says those higher corporate taxes are going to hurt that from happening, from bringing stuff back to the area?
Yeah, I think, you know, we've seen that, and certainly with the automotive industry, you know, the big three downstate, that, you know, it's something that we are concerned with and we keep in our thoughts. But I also think there's other legislative things that we can do, you know, whether it's with sales tax or whether it's with other incentives to help people invest in new vehicles. Outside of these huge corporate tax breaks, because one thing we're not doing at the state level is tracking whether they work or not, whether or not they really are the difference between, you know, big industry staying or going, and Amazon. You know, I look at that example from last year. That's probably the best one I can relate it to. Is, you know, we gave them $4 billion in tax breaks over 30 years, and they said, sorry, we're not choosing Michigan because you don't have the skilled workforce. And, you know, when technology is increasing, every job is getting more automated. I think we need to look at, you know, what is most important to a corporation. And I can tell you that many of them, you know, tax breaks isn't number one on the list. It's actually those skilled workers who are trained, have the soft skills to get up every day, come to work, are willing to learn and want to stay in Michigan, because turnover isn't good for industry either. So I think we can cut back on some of the handouts we're giving to large corporations. You know, invest in the next generation and workforce. And
but if we cut back on some of those, then we have to improve in other areas that are also going to be enticing for those companies to come to the area.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. About education, I believe it's proposal 1 this year is recreational marijuana. And one of the big parts of this is that a giant chunk of the taxes on that, on any marijuana, would go directly to education. Right. And then the other part, I think, is roads or something. There's a few different things that it goes into.
Yes.
Do you think, would that go to the state fund, or would that go to local areas?
Yeah, it would go to the state fund. And, you know, I think there's still some give and take with where exactly all the money would go should it pass. You know, some of it, I think there's a strong voice to be put back towards, you know, our opioid crisis and dealing with some of, you know, the addiction problems that are increasing in Michigan, unfortunately. Right. And so I do think that some of it will go to education, roads, but, you know, I think there's a big need right now to make sure that we kind of fix a lot of the problems that we're seeing in our rural communities, certainly in the UP, by helping people get the type of treatment that we know works.
What do you think that the state should be doing more in that area?
Yeah, we're working closely right now with DHHS at the state level, because we know that there is going to be a $3 million pass-through grant from the federal level for opioids and dealing with the addiction and substance abuse that we're seeing both in Lower Michigan, but certainly here in my region in the UP. And looking at ways that different agencies can work together, coming up with a long-term program, not just treat the symptoms, get them stable, and then out the door back into similar environments without any training or education to help with kicking the habit. I think these are things that there's a whole group of people right now that really want to solve this problem and help families, help the next generation of students and people stay away from drugs.
And some of this kind of stems out of poor health care, and especially a lot of it starts with addiction to prescription pills.
Yep.
And do you think that the state should be taking a bigger role in health care and actually more preventative care rather than reactionary to all of this with just prescribing pills or treating them and kicking them out the door?
Right.
What do you think the state's role should be in that sort of situation?
Well, one of the things we didn't do is there's a state filed lawsuits where several states have stepped up to actually sue the pharmaceutical companies that keep wreaking havoc on their local communities, whether it's their police force, whether it's young kids getting into drugs, family situations, homelessness, all of this stuff. I think a lot of states are stepping up and saying, time out, you're part of the problem, and until you realize that you're incentivizing physicians to write more prescriptions, and every time we come out with one and try and regulate it more, you come up with another one, really kind of making them come to the table and have that conversation. A lot of the healthcare laws happen at the federal level. States are pretty limited in terms of really restructuring and recreating the system we have.
Well, we've seen like Mitt Romney, for instance, had what was a precursor to Obamacare, but he had it just in his state. I'm not saying that we should be going in that direction necessarily, but we've seen in certain situations where states have been able to form their own or structure their own healthcare systems a little bit differently than the federal level. I just don't know if you think that the state should be doing that, or if they should be taking a more hands-off approach. Yeah,
I think we've signed up for expanded Medicaid. I think that was great. I really give our Governor Snyder a lot of credit for that.
Especially this area is a big, a lot of recipients of the expanded Medicaid and everything. So,
And Healthy Michigan, another great program where for every $2 we get from the federal government, we match it with $1. And without that money, we couldn't do all this stuff. But when you talk about Medicare for all or healthcare for all, we found out that the price tag for that is about $53 billion for Michigan if we were to go to that system, and our state budget is only about $57 billion. And so, would I want to do it? Yes. Can we afford it? Not at the state level, but I think to complement programs and to really make best use of our Medicaid dollars. I'll go back to the opioid crisis. When we're treating people in the emergency room for drug overdoses and all of that, it's much more costly to do that than to actually slow down and take the steps to invest in preventative treatment, talking to students about the dangers of it, and actually doing more of a month-long 30 to 60-day program to get people back on their feet and out of the environment that triggers them to do it.
Yeah, and that's something that is, I think, overlooked a lot, is that preventative care could really help a lot. And I don't think our healthcare system at any level is really set up to provide that in a great way. Do you think that, you said that it would cost about $58 billion for doing a Medicare for all sort of situation?
53 billion.
53, okay. How much do people in Michigan spend on healthcare a year as it is? Like everyone and the companies paying into it.
It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to see how much we're all paying into it and how much it
Sure.
would cost just for it to
Absolutely.
be covered, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just
Yeah.
an interesting question.
Yeah, I do know, one final comment maybe on healthcare is that, it's causing issues, there's just the high price of it for our schools, for local government, county government, and private businesses. So until we get a handle on the cost of healthcare, and if we can't find ways to drive down those costs, we're going to see probably the biggest issue facing our nation kind of explode, and hopefully it won't be that painful, but I think we'd be better to kind of try and reform it before it gets too far out of control.
Right. I'm going to switch gears yet again here.
Okay.
Winter's coming up. It's starting to
Yes.
snow already,
Yep.
which means there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on our roads, and our
Yes.
infrastructure is not graded very highly as it is. What do you think the state should be doing better when it comes to our infrastructure, which grades right near the bottom when it comes to easily the states in the area, but nationwide as a whole?
Yeah, I had this conversation with my dad the other night, and he said, well, how come other states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're always fixing their roads? And the unfortunate truth is that Michigan taxes overall are very low. And our income tax, we're one of the lowest in the nation. Our property taxes are mid-range, so we're pretty much on par with that. And even our sales tax is low compared to other states. So the way that they're making up finding funding for infrastructure are small bumps to what the average person pays. So they're spreading it out across, the average person, versus, some radical thing where, you just pay more, whether you're a, transporter or a company, which typically we would see those costs passed on to, the consumer anyway.
Yeah.
Other states are not having the issue where local communities are having to go out and ask voters to help them bond for new projects. I think the thing that Michigan needs to be careful of is not getting into the business of, taking out road funding on credit. Because right now, what the state is paying is about, $240 million just in interest on past infrastructure bonds.
Wow.
And that's just the interest. And
Yeah.
so trying to get people to understand that Michigan taxes right now, we're in the lowest bracket in the nation. And if you spread it across, everyone, at a small rate, and I mean, we're talking $10 to $15 a month out of your income tax or sales tax, I think that would go further than getting ourselves into debt by borrowing.
Well, we've seen what happens when states cut taxes so much,
Yeah.
like in Kansas, for instance, a few
Right.
years back, virtually
Absolutely. Right.
inefficient in every single category, and we
Yep.
don't want to be there. So what do you think should be the steps going forward to make sure that we don't wind up where we can't fund our schools, we can't repave our
Right.
roads, we can't do anything, essentially?
Yep.
But as in this case with Kansas a few years ago,
Right.
what do you think the state should be doing going forward to ensure that doesn't happen?
I think education is key, and I think elected officials like myself shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. I think there's a stigma around taxes. People have told me, don't bring it up, don't talk about it. But if we don't talk about it, and if people don't understand that, compared to other states that are funding their roads,
Right.
have a better revenue pot in reserve,
Yeah.
we need to pay a little more, and it's not a lot, but we have to be able to at least come to the table and talk about that. And isn't that better than, doubling your water bills and, having your electric bills quadruple? So,
Right.
if we can spread it out, I think that's the best way to move forward.
And that's something that is, taxes are, no politician wants to go out there
Right.
and say, I'm going to raise your taxes.
Absolutely.
It just never
Right.
happens.
Right.
And it's the cliche thing is I'm going to lower your taxes, what every politician says.
Right.
But these are sort of instances where we have to work on our structure, our tax structure
Yep.
a little bit, because we don't want to be so inefficient that we can't do anything.
Absolutely. And I have some of my Republican counterparts down in Lansing, they said, well, I took this pledge, I said I wasn't going to raise taxes at all anywhere. And I said, well, that's a tough one, because at the same time, you're expecting to pay for roads by increasing, vehicle registration fees and
Right.
not dealing with car insurance. So we are passing it on in extreme measures if we're not really talking about it at the state level and doing what we can, to fix it, because the money isn't there in our current revenue budget. It's just not.
Right.
And we have to find ways to raise that revenue. To me, the best thing moving forward is, probably to have very minimal increases, spread it out over everyone in the state, and return a lot of that money back to local government so they can fix the roads.
And you brought up an interesting topic, car insurance.
Yes.
Which is something, again, every politician says we got to lower the car insurance rates,
Yep.
but it never happens.
Yeah.
And it hasn't happened yet. What do you think should happen with car insurance to bring those rates down?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we need to do is get to the table with insurance companies and not be afraid to have those conversations. Having our catastrophic fund, certainly if your family member, yourself, your husband, whoever, wife, is in an accident, you do want the best care. So there's no doubt in my mind that we can still have that, but not have the high premium costs. And I think what it is, it comes down to transparency. It comes down to making sure that rates aren't set on people's credit scores. Things that really don't affect whether or not you're a good driver.
Yeah.
And really saying that we want to see the books, and we want to make sure that what you are charging isn't overkill. Not that we don't want to care for patients and people that need it, but
Right. And in this field, as with the state government as a whole, transparency has not been
no.
a big priority
Right.
for these people and
Yep.
these companies, I should say.
Yeah.
And so we don't actually know everything that they determine their rates on, do we?
We don't.
No.
No.
And that's scary.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah. So what do you think would actually be, I know we need to talk to them, and that's a good point that you brought up, but what's the actual mechanism that's going to bring this down?
Yeah.
Is it going to be changing the plans that we are ensure are available? Is that going to be changing our healthcare system or working with our healthcare system, because car insurance works basically as a second healthcare
Right.
in these instances?
Yep.
What's going to actually bring that down?
Yeah, I think other states that rely more on the healthcare side to kick in after they reach their limits, they are paying more for Medicaid and all of that because of their car insurance and how it's set up. I think the best thing we can do is to make sure that our insurance board, they're all appointed positions, that we put people on there who are average customers. People that aren't necessarily from the industry or have worked in the industry, but people that run a business, have to insure a fleet of vehicles. And what that really, would do, I think, is kind of open up the hard conversations, but also make sure that the policies and, the legislation that we pass is a little more balanced.
Do you think those people should be appointed, or do you think they could be elected and have some responsibility to the voters and the people that they're actually making these decisions for?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
It could be an elected board. I'm not sure any state has done that, but it puts the accountability at a whole nother level.
And especially going back to transparency, Michigan,
right
near the bottom on transparency.
The bottom.
Yeah.
Yes.
So wouldn't doing something like this to actually bring the accountability so people are accountable to the voters in a better way, wouldn't that help with that?
It would.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Do you think or would you make any changes to the transparency issues in Michigan? If you get reelected, is there going to be something you're going to do? I know you're on right now the local government committee, but that could change in the spring or early winter, I should say.
Yep.
What committees you're on? Is there something that you'd be doing or pushing for to change this transparency issue?
Yeah, I have colleagues right now who have introduced bills that would mandate that any elected leader, whether it's the governor, us in the House of Representatives, the Senate, have to disclose our financial interests.
Mm-hmm.
And I've signed on. I've disclosed all of my financial investments, any interest I have in certain businesses. And I think what that does is, people know then that if I'm putting a bill forward and I own, 500 rental houses and I've got a bill where I get special exemptions,
right.
I think it stops some of that from happening. Mm-hmm. And, it's a start. The FOIA laws we have are extremely weak. And knowing that, no matter what is done, the Flint water crisis is a great example that, our governor, his emails are protected. I mean, that's hard for a lot of people to stomach, especially when they elected him and he works for them.
Right.
So I'm all about changing that. I think we need to be, up to speed, and as elected officials, we should be held accountable.
I agree. I hope it changes.
Yep.
Really quick, before we start wrapping things up, Proposal 1.
Yep.
Are you for it or against it? Do you think it should pass? Do you think it should not pass?
Yeah, I think I have mixed feelings on both sides of this.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly talking to law enforcement, it does clog up a lot of our, court system right now. But, the hardest part for me is that it is still, federally illegal. And so if we pass it, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of gray area to manage it and, put legislation in place. That's an issue. The other issue I would say that I hear mostly from businesses is they can't find people to pass drug tests. Mm-hmm. And whether they're CDL drivers, people that are operating heavy machinery, we already have a workforce shortage, and so their concern is that we just can't find people who can stay clean and do
we've
this.
We've seen these numbers in the other states that it's going to draw more people to the state, and not just people coming here to smoke marijuana. Especially Colorado, the population has increased so much. They're pretty much taking their second biggest city and multiplying it every year or two now with how much growth they're getting. So I think that maybe not such a big issue. I think in the long run, when you look at what it's going to do for the state. Proposal 2, for it or against it?
I am for this one.
Yeah.
I've seen my party do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know right now it seems like they're Democrat leaning or independent leaning people that are really pushing the gerrymandering and redistricting, but my party is guilty of it. I'm sure if you look back, just as the Republicans right now are getting criticized. So I really do think we can have an independent board of people. We can go back and know if people are Democrats, Republicans, lean Democrat, lean Republican, or independents. We already categorize people like that without knowing specifically who they voted for. So I think we can come up with a system of people that.
And there are states that already have this in place.
Absolutely.
That have gone through this sort of process
Yep.
of taking the redistricting out of the hands of the people that are in the power that
Right.
just are going to keep recycling like their voters essentially.
Yes. Yep.
Do you think that more Republicans should be backing it? Because there isn't a lot of Republicans around the state that are really backing it, and especially I believe Schuette and other lobbying groups tried to stop it from getting on the ballot.
Right. Yep.
Do you think that they should be backing it more?
I think you'd see the same thing if it was, Democrats.
Democrats were in power, yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, what I look for is what's best for the citizens of Michigan, to be fairly represented, or to not have doubts in their mind that their district was redrawn, with big chunks cut out.
Right.
My district has Ishpeming Township cut out, and I literally have to drive through the city,
Yeah.
through the township,
Yeah.
and then back into my district, where we know that was done, probably to take some of the heavier Democrat-leaning voters out. But I just think that there's a better way to do it, and I think this would clarify that.
Okay, proposal 3.
Yeah.
What do you think about proposal 3?
Yeah, I think this one, I understand kind of both sides. I think we do, need to modernize our voting laws. I think we need to make it easier while still holding the integrity of, your ballot, your vote, to be able to vote in secrecy of who you want.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm not sure if the Constitution is the best place to put it, simply because if there are changes, if we want to add something else, maybe technology changes and there's a different way to vote or something like that, it's much harder to go back and open up our Constitution and add things versus...
Is it though? I'm not sure it necessarily is. I mean, we have thousands of amendments to our state constitution.
Yeah.
It's not like the federal constitution where it takes a much longer process.
Right.
And I know that's always, and it's something that I am hesitant about, is changing our state constitution.
Yes.
But when you look at
Yep.
how many amendments are already on it that have changed it, that
Right.
have just kind of, gone
Right.
over the same kind of things,
Yeah.
is that necessarily a good argument for that anymore? I know back when the right to work issue happened, that was another big thing, was, you can't
Right.
vote for it because it'll change the Constitution.
Yep.
And now we're kind of kicking ourselves about that, I think, in some instances. But
Right.
so do you think that is a valid argument against us? Is it's going to change the Constitution?
I think it gives less flexibility, and I think the reason we're seeing it go through an initiative like this is because, again, the elected officials, myself included for this last year, when we can't have dialect and, kind of come to a consensus on what we should do on the floor with legislation, I think you see, people take it into their own hands. And, for me, I would hope that we can reestablish the trust of what we do in Lansing, and the fact that there's a give and take. Straight ticket voting is a big example of this.
Right.
But because we don't have that right now, because there is polarization that we haven't seen probably since, the Vietnam War and that era,
Right.
I think you're seeing people say, I want it in the Constitution because I don't trust the elected officials to do it right on their own. So.
And this is, Proposal 3 has a big impact, especially when you look around the country and there are states that are taking voter rights away
Yes. Yep.
in mass numbers. When you look at the
Right.
number of people that are getting purged out of their,
Yep.
election rights and these sort of things, and voter ID laws. So I
Yep.
think this is a big issue that affects a lot more people
Yes.
than what we want to think. And
Right.
a lot of times these proposals get overlooked. They're at, a different part of the ballot. They don't have the big names
Yep.
like the
Right.
politicians with the signs
Right.
have out there.
Yes.
So I
Yep.
think this is a big issue.
Yeah.
And these are things that affect people almost more than, voting for a
Yep.
federal level person that they're not going to deal with
Absolutely.
day to day.
Absolutely.
All right, real
Yeah.
quick, you've talked about it, touched on it a couple times.
Yeah.
In Lansing and across the country, there's a lot of political divide.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to do if you're reelected to kind of bring that together a little bit and work across the aisle a little bit better?
I think one thing the UP legislators do, certainly, Representative Keevala did it before me. Tom Casperson has been a pioneer and leader. Ed McBroom, Scott Dianda, everyone from the UP understands that when we're 4 people that go down there out of 148, we stick together, and we might disagree with legislation that one another puts out, whether it's party or just, our ideological differences. But at the end of the day, we're stronger together. And to have that open dialogue and to be able to have a working relationship where, we don't take it personally, but we have the ability to come to one another and share what we like, what we don't like, how we could make it better. I think we actually serve as a role model for, how both Democrats and Republicans really should be working together more. And, my hope is if I get reelected and I go back down there that, I already have shown my party that, I'm not just loyal to them at any cost. I think of my district. I think about, whether it's mining legislation, timber, forest legislation, jobs, and just the urban versus rural difference that, I might not vote with them. It might be better for me to vote with Republicans. And I think that's one thing that we have in the UP that has served us well, and that people vote for the person up here more than they do the party.
All right, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
It's been a good conversation.
Yeah,
And I want to thank you for tuning in to In Focus, and you can watch the full episode on our website at abc10up.com/infocus. Thank you.